Texas Swarm! All right, guys. Rich Eisen, formerly of the NFL Network, has his own radio/TV show, was talking about what he's been hearing about the Houston Texans offseason. And like literally every other NFL analyst, all he is hearing are glowing things about your beloved Deep Steel Blue Boys on Kirby.
And that's the way it goes. That's why I always ask folks who are in the information business, what are you, when you talk to others, what's the consensus on certain subject matters? And the consensus on the subject matter of which team has pressed the most buttons properly to set themselves up for ultimate success this year, he said Houston Texans.
Hell yeah.
I mean, he's not wrong.
And I think adding Diggs to this mix is going to create much havoc on other teams' defenses, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. It was already going to be a problem.
Okay, is he done pausing now? That was the longest pause in the history of radio.
I don't know. Jim Rome exists. I exist too. I have sometimes long pauses.
2 full seconds.
I was like,
before an and then like one more second.
I was like, it's over. And they just kept talking. He's not wrong. All the moves they made, they pushed all the right buttons this offseason. Except for corner, probably. It's probably the one that, I mean, clearly they're going to, Danico Autry's going to play on the inside. The defense, the offense, they attack their weaknesses. They added to their strengths. And there's a reason why it's not just people like us that think the Texans are going to be incredible this year. It's a pretty general consensus across the sport. The Texans are going to be good this year.
Literally everybody outside of Houston. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who thinks that the Houston Texans are pretenders going into this year outside of maybe someone living in Nashville, Jacksonville, or Indianapolis that's doing a daily sports talk show.
And if they do, if you hear someone like what could go wrong with the Astros, it feels like they're stretching it, or it's just injuries. Like it's a cliche, or they're really pushing, like what is going to happen. Like just like Stephon Diggs is the ultimate cancer and ruins all their chemistry. CJ's ego is too big for the team. Stuff like that. Like it's hypothetical stuff you can't even like quantify. So he's right. Texans swarm, baby.
Texans swarm. The New York Jets are without Aaron Rodgers at minicamp, and the more I think about it, going into this year, Robert Saleh, head coach of the New York Jets, is doomed. Joe asked an interesting question on the show rundown. Hey, who are the Houston Texans going to get fired this year? Over the course of this season, 17 games, you will play some coaches who will not be with us next year. That's just how it works. Generally, 6 to 8 get canned after every single season. So, Joe, I'm curious as to who you think the Houston Texans might end up getting bleep canned.
So, Robert Saleh was the first one that came to mind. Week 9, because I feel like it has to be post Week 8. You rarely see what happened to Bill O'Brien, where he got fired after Week 4.
Also important to note that game, October 31st, is a Thursday night football game. Mm-hmm. So you have generally 10 days or so, at least until your next game. I feel like, this is the number one on the list. Robert Saleh, the Houston Texans could potentially get him canned on Halloween.
The next one that I noticed, so they play the Texans on the 18th. They have a quick turnaround to Sunday the 24th, only 6 days between Houston and Washington. If the Texans beat the Dallas Cowboys on Monday Night Football by like 20 points and the Cowboys season is not going the way they want, doesn't that feel like something that would get Jerry Jones to act hastily and fire a coach midseason?
Maybe.
Even though he doesn't do it.
But, I mean, look at how long Jason Garrett held on to that job.
But it feels like the Bill Belichick stuff is really out there, that he could be the next coach of the Cowboys. And if you're going to fire someone mid-season, I feel like getting stomped by your in-state rivals would be something that might push Jerry Jones over the edge. And because obviously the season has to go poor before that, so the Texans would be capitalizing on it. But those were the two that I thought the most. The only other one was if you went earlier in the season, is if by week 5 the Bills season has turned into an utter disaster.
Yeah, that was the only one I could think of as well. Because Matt Eberflus in Chicago, there's no way week 2 with Caleb Williams that the Bears are going to get rid of Eberflus after 2 games. Like, they would have to be the most disastrous 2 games ever with all sorts of off the field scandal.
Yeah.
If the Bears game was like week 6, I could see that more than week 2.
And they had their scandals last year. Like, they had a coach have his house raided by the FBI, and Eberflus survived that. So.
Wait, why did he get his house raided?
No one knows.
Do we ever find out?
No, we never got an official word. There were the reports that it was like child pornography, and then that was denied, but it was never verified. But the way that it was denied, it never specifically denied those allegations. They just denied that Hallis Hall was also raided by the FBI. So it's still kind of unclear of exactly what happened with that. But yeah, I think those would be the top 3.
Yeah, you look at the schedule, and with all the good teams that they play, it's really hard to envision a lot of the coaches that they play being out of a gig at the end of the year. Shane Steichen in Indianapolis, he's looked really good after one season. They won games with Gardner Minshew under center. Kevin O'Connell's done a pretty good job with the Minnesota Vikings. That game's really early in the year. I don't think Doug Peterson's on the hot seat yet. Theoretically, if things go very poorly for Jacksonville, that becomes a different conversation.
The Week 13 game was the one I was looking at.
December
for
1st at Jacksonville.
That's also, you could also, that's another one where if it's 2 weeks later, I feel better about that one being a potential one, because basically no matter what happens in Week 13 with Jacksonville, they're probably still in it for at least a wild card with 6 games left, 5 games left.
I think the Saleh one is the most likely.
Yeah. Solid by timing and shakiest ground already.
Because there's still, like, it's week 9, so there's still
salvageable.
A bunch of season left to save it with, I guess, Nathaniel Hackett as the head coach of the Jets for the rest of the season.
Yeah,
and
I'm
keep
sold.
Aaron Rodgers happy. Like,
who's the defensive coordinator?
The most logical, probably, of all of them.
Honestly, there's probably more of a chance of Hackett being out by that point in the year.
That's a good point.
Which offensive coordinator do they get fired? Nathaniel Hackett.
Once again, I would say it's the Jets are the one on the schedule that just makes the most sense, because it's a brutal schedule that they have this coming season, and a lot of the cupcakes that are on shaky ground. I would specifically point to Chicago and Jacksonville to a degree. Maybe I'm being a little disrespectful to Jacksonville with the way that they finished the year with Sean McDermott and his situation in Buffalo. Like, they're playing him so early, all of those games. I just have a hard time seeing any of those guys getting gunned.
Yeah.
It's more of a timing thing where I could see Doug Peterson getting fired after the season. I do not think I can see it after they play the Texans in Week 13.
No.
Another guy, just to say a new name and maybe talk about it. Someone I think we talked about it yesterday. Week 15, Mike McDaniel.
Man, I don't think they'll do it with McDaniel. I feel like they'll blame Tua more than they'll blame McDaniel for this coming season.
Fall guy power rankings,
Tua's over McDaniel there.
I really think that I think it's more likely that they don't pay Tua this season and they see how it goes. And if it's a disaster, they just move on from Tua, that they bite the bullet and they just say, hey, we're going to have to find a way to find another quarterback.
Yeah.
Like, maybe they're the team, like maybe they're calling Atlanta this offseason trying to acquire Kirk Cousins. Like, I just don't know. Like, Mike McDaniel seems like a great coach, an offensive wizard. It seems like you would choose him over Tua.
Worst case scenario, they'll franchise tag Tua.
Yeah.
I feel like this is one of those situations where Tua doesn't really have that much leverage. He needs that second contract to get the kind of leverage that Deshaun Watson had. Otherwise, he just has to stick with it. And the big problem for Tua is that there's always a potential that he's going to get rocked and he's going to miss some time with a concussion. And I mean, you're already in a spot with him and all the concussions that he suffered where, I mean, you actually are a little bit worried for his overall health, let alone his availability.
Yeah. The other coach, like, just because it does seem to be a new trend in the NFL where all of a sudden teams are starting to get less stubborn I would say, with their coaching hires when they make a mistake. Like, obviously, we saw the Texans do it twice. We saw the Broncos do it with Hackett. If this season is just an utter disaster, and it's kind of cheating with this answer, and the Titans win less than 3 games,
It would be hilarious.
if they fire Callahan after 1
It
year.
would be really funny if they did that. I mean, one of those rando mics that they hired, I don't think had the longest shelf life. I don't know if it was Mike Munchak or if it was Mike Malarkey,
Oh, yeah, you're right. One of them didn't.
but I
I
believe
think it was Malarkey.
Yeah.
Mike. No, he got 3 years. Mike Munchak did. So yeah, Mike Malarkey had the exotic smash mouth offense. I feel like he had a couple of seasons in Tennessee. He was 2 years the head coach of the Titans. So they have moved on from coaches rather quickly, but I feel like they'll give Brian Callahan at least 1 year, even though he is a very, very boring and underwhelming hire. So we'll see. We were just discussing who the Houston Texans might get canned as head coach over the course of this year.